Hi. All right, so I'm going to take this out because I inevitably will walk off and walk away from it. So anyways, I have talked on this topic a number of times. This is going to be the really, really fast version of it. And I'm happy to answer more questions, give you more detail, anything like that. Just grab me afterwards, and I'm happy to talk more. But what we ran into on a project that I work on is there are occasions where traditional personas are not terribly useful. And so we took a behavioral approach to defining some audiences. And so that's where this came from. Maybe I'll figure out. So we'll start with this. Can you guys at all guess what these 6 people might have in common, other than the fact they're friends of mine on Facebook and I stole their profile pictures without their permission? If you're thinking in terms of traditional demographics, we've got an array here of age, gender. We've got varying types of employment. We've got them living all over the place. It's really hard to take these 6 people and put them into one category. But turns out what they all have in common is that they all look online first and foremost for health information. When they have a question like, is this bug bite Lyme disease or a mosquito bite? Or do I think I have Ebola because they've seen it on TV? All 6 of these people, first and foremost, think, oh, I better Google that, or something similar to that. Now, granted, Bill down here in the corner, that's my grandfather, probably asked my sister, Sarah, to do it for him. But his first instinct is look online, which is kind of impressive for an almost 90-year-old man. So, looking at how these 6 people behave gives us a basis for segmenting an audience in a way that we'd never get these 6 people together using a traditional persona. And I'm clicking the wrong button again and again. There we go. So what is an audience profile? First of all, it's not a persona. It's a high-level outline to guide strategy, not tactics. This is not intended to be, how am I going to write the tweets to so-and-so? This is sort of a bigger picture. We use attributes based on common behaviors. In this case, with the project that I worked on, it was specifically in the health and technology information consumption. And we look at priorities and goals, influences, habits, attitudes, social profiles, some critical information needs, and information challenges. And we figure out how these people fall into these broader audiences that then we can use to make strategic decisions about communications, user experience, online, things like that. So, National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. Please, God, tell me I spelled that all right. I made that slide this morning. So the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, they cover heart, lung, blood, and sleep science as it relates to everybody but the zombie population, pretty much. And when you get down to it and you start trying to figure out, okay, who's their audience, and you start trying to define it, well, how do you define everybody? They didn't have a lot to go with. When I first started on the project, one of the first things I was asked to do was, we need to update our personas. They had 20 of them. And as a couple of people who are actually here today can attest, once I got off the floor, I told them we had to start from scratch. That having 20 of anything, you can't keep up with. Whether or not 7 is actually that magical number that we all hear about, like, oh yeah, you can remember, 7 things plus or minus. It certainly isn't 20. So, as we say down south, bless their hearts, we started from scratch. And what we did, and this is really confusing looking, and I'm going to explain it all, so we actually looked at the intersection between the way people take in health information and the way they relate to technology. Now, what we ended up calling that was That actually isn't a little thingy, so that does, oh, that thing, see right there. So they're what we refer to as their tech savvy or their health savvy. And that is that this was their affinity for and their access to health information and technology. And when we took this intersection, we were able to come up with these 3 broad groups. So these guys up here in the corner, ready and willing, they have access to technology and they have some desire to be looking at health information, specifically online. People who are back down here in this corner, we called them out of reach. And those are the folks that either they're the technophobe who doesn't want to use technology, someone who doesn't have access to it. And there are also people who don't necessarily, their health isn't their top priority. And yes, those people do exist, more of them than there should be. Then these other 2 groups, they each have barriers in some area. They either, maybe they're very technically savvy, but health isn't really that high on their list of priorities. Think about college-age kids. They're going to live forever, right? I'm fairly certain I was going to. Or perhaps they're interested in their health and they just don't have access to, or they don't have a great deal of familiarity with technology. So think about my mama, who wouldn't have any idea what to do with a computer if her life depended on it. Quite unlike my grandfather, who just calls my sister. So we use these three broad categories, and that's helpful. We've at least gotten it down to where we can start to classify people and say, okay, you've got barriers to either the technology side or the health side. And then we can start trying to figure, but we needed to segment just a little bit more, figure out how do we break this down a little bit further. So we overlaid with that, we've got a couple of things. First of all, we've got whether or not they were, so if you start on one end down here, you'll see very faint, they're open to actually using technology to access their health information. You've got resistant on the far end, and so the arrows kind of go both ways. So the way we took this center section, this discouraged area, is we actually looked at access specifically. So beyond their attitude towards technology and their attitude towards health information online, and we looked at their consumption behaviors, and we considered the audience's level of access in addition to that attitude, and that's how we end up with these 4 areas down here. So we had proactive. Those are the guys that are ready to go. They've got access, they've got an interest, we don't have any barriers we got to cross. We've got conscious, so there are people who care about their health but don't necessarily have the access to use the technology. On the other side, you've got reactive, the folks that are like, okay, fine, I'll look it up if I have to. I've got some symptom, I'm not going to the doctor. But they've got the access, just not necessarily a proactive approach to their health. And then you've got what we affectionately refer to as oblivious. Those fine folks who not only don't know they have a problem, but aren't going to go look for it. So we took these behaviors that go with each one of these, and we looked at the information needs of these different groups of people that need information from the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. We already had a general idea. We knew there were doctors. We knew there were researchers. We knew there were patients, advocates, people who were in the community health worker field. And we applied these 4 definitions or sort of broad descriptions to each one of them, and figured out, looking at things like, what is their social profile? Are they lurkers? Like, one of the fastest growing groups of users on Facebook are grandparents that all they want to see are pictures of their grandkids, but they're not contributing any other way. So we looked at things like that. We looked at, are they looking for, do they have a great need to connect? Do they have a great need to find just quick factual information? I do not envy Alejo, who has to figure out how to get doctors to give him answers about things, because one of the things that we did to actually have come up with all this is we did primary and secondary research. as well as combining with publicly available research on health information consumption and technology use. And the doctors that we interviewed, the ones we were able to interview, not the most fun I've ever had. The profiles, when you do these broad stroke analysis of an audience, you're looking at an amalgamation of actual fact and some reasonable conclusions based on research. So there's always going to be an outlier. Yeah, but what about so-and-so? Well, yeah, of course. But you can start to get a bigger picture, starts to come into focus when you look at these behaviors as opposed to Mary, who's a 34-year-old mom whose kid plays soccer and she's volunteers with the PTO. What did I just learn about her? I mean, there's a lot if I really want to dig into it, but is it more helpful, especially when you're dealing with something like health information and their consumption online, is it more helpful to know that Mary's first instinct is to look online for information, or her first instinct is to call her doctor's office? Some of the really interesting case studies that we saw, there's a group that in particular, if you want to reach certain demographics, there are behaviors that go with those demographics and you can kind of work around them. So when we start to look in particular within HLBI at groups with health disparities, or there's a lot about women's heart health, we can start to go down a level and do personas and actually get a great deal of use out of personas. I'm not saying that personas are dead or anything like that. But when your audience is as broad as something like an HLBI, using these more behavioral indicators can help you break a group of people down in a way that you might not have seen them before. And especially if you're looking at from the perspective of user experience, it helps you figure out what would these people do, not necessarily who they are, which is more helpful when you want to, say, enable a behavior change or get the right information to the right people. It also helps too, one of the things that we had to figure out was some of the people, the oblivious group, the out of, what we termed as being out of reach, we actually were able to say, okay, we're not going to reach them via a digital channel, most likely. So where are our secondary audiences? Meaning that the audience is going to relay the information to them. So if you're looking for at people who only show up in the emergency room when they get sick. They don't have a primary care doctor. They're not likely to go to the emergency room even unless it's an actual, don't have any other choice. You're looking at physicians and health professionals who are going to be the ones who can relay the information that we might have for them. Advocates, community health workers, things like that. So we were able to actually go down a level from this and look at those secondary audiences and map how messages can actually get across to the ones that you deem possibly unreachable depending on what your intersection is. Again, this is really fast, really high level. If you're interested in hearing more about it, I can give you detail for days. Thanks for listening. I very much appreciate it. And I'll be in the back if you have any questions.